Shavua Tov. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. Rav Uri, thank you for that beautiful, amazing, inspiring music, both before and after Shabbos. Sharon and I want to welcome all of you to the 19th annual Shabbaton in memory of my father, Herbert Lieberman, and Sharon's father, Reuben D. Silverman. This is the first online Shabbaton, and we hope it's the last online Shabbaton. We look forward to having future Shabbaton with you again in person. The Shabbaton was established in 2001 after my father's death. The idea was to find and to bring to the Beth Shalom community the preeminent scholars in the Jewish world whose words and whose work, both of those are incredibly important, the words and the work, have helped inspire and guide the Jewish people. And over the years, we've had what I hope you feel is a good list of scholars who have come and joined us so that we can learn with them. The former Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Benny Lau, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, Blue Greenberg, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, Rabbi Dov Linzer, Rabbi Haskell Lookstein. But the first scholar in residence that we had for the Shabbaton, the very first year, was Rav Avi Weiss, who's been a friend of mine and our family for more than 35 years, and a pro bono client of mine for that entire length of time. Rav Avi is an amazing person with a resume that has so many different dimensions to it. He's an activist, a person who has pushed the envelope in so many important areas. The first being his work to help free the 3 million Jews who were imprisoned in the Soviet Union, a cause for which he almost gave his life during an incident where he was protesting the Bolshoi Ballet at Lincoln Center many, many years ago when he was attacked by Soviet ruffians and suffered a heart attack. His work to free Soviet Jews was recognized by none other than Natan Sharansky, who made the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale the first place he visited in the United States after he was freed, in recognition of the amazing leadership work that Rav Avi had done. He's been a thought leader. Now a lot of people talk about the issue of expanding the role of women in Orthodox Judaism. Rav Avi wrote probably the first and most influential book on that subject, Women at Prayer, back in 1990. And it's a text that's still studied by everybody who's interested in the field. He's now published 6 or 7 books, amazing range of scholarship. And he's a builder and a mentor. He built the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, the Beit, community that has been emulated in dozens and dozens of places around the world. He founded YCT, which now has 140 rabbis in the field, including many, many people with whom you're quite familiar. Rav Nissen, Rav Eitan, Rav Uri, Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter, and he also taught Rabbi Shmuel Herzfeld before YCT was created. Rabbi Weiss has also created Yeshivat Maharat, which is training women rabbinical leaders. Just an amazing, amazing variety of areas in which he's had an influence on the world. Just a word about the two people in whose memory the Shabbaton was created and has been perpetuated. My father, Herbert Lieberman, was a community leader in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, par excellence. He was somebody who, whenever he saw a problem that was facing the community, he had to solve it. Not get somebody else to solve it, not write a letter to the editor. He was the one who had to solve it. And at one time or another, he was the chairman or the president of every community organization in Riverdale, every single one. Just the thing that really motivated him was when he saw people without power, people who could not protect themselves. He got into the ring and fought for them. And one of the things I've talked about before is how when the first group home wanted to open in Riverdale, my father was the chairman of the community board. There was widespread community opposition. My father spearheaded the process that led to the approval of the group home. And now there are many in Riverdale and many all around the country. My father-in-law, Sharon's father, Barbara's father, Lawrence's father, Reuben D. Silverman, passed away 5 years ago now. He was what he sometimes called a simple country lawyer from Lakewood, New Jersey, but he was by no means a simple country lawyer. He was a simple country lawyer the same way Sam Irvin used to call himself a simple country lawyer. He was married to his bride, Phyllis, for 60 years. Phyllis is on the call. My father was married to my mother, Carol, who's also on the call for 46 years. Reuben was a World War II vet. He had been a medic in the Navy, and he came back. Stayed in the area near Lakewood, New Jersey to go to school, gave up the chance to go to Yale, to go to Seton Hall to be able to take care of his mother while he was practicing law. Just an incredible man. I want to share some thanks at this point to Rav Uri, who I think, as many of you know, Ellie Kranzler was going to be our musical leader, but Reb Ellie's sister passed away on Wednesday, and he wasn't able to join us. Rav Uri, without hesitating at all, jumped in at our request to lead the musical portion of the Shabbaton. Thank you, Rav Uri, just amazing. And thank you to Ellie Kranzler. We hope to get you in person down as a scholar for a future Shabbaton at Beth Shalom. Thank you to Rabbi Cooper and Rabbi Antin for the work you've been putting this together, and all the folks in the office. Stevie and Rachel, really a ton of behind the scenes work. But most of all, I want to thank the members of the Beth Shalom community. For 19 years, you've been supporting this Shabbaton. You've been coming to the events. You've been coming to the dinners. You've been participating actively in the learning. And it is so wonderful to see so many of you tonight by Zoom. And we look forward to being with you in person. Now, I'd like to ask you, at this point, I would ask you to rise to join Rabbi Weiss, but a virtual rising, please, for Harab Avi Weiss.
Shalom, shalom, Shavuot Tov. From myself and Toby, say a word, say hello, Tov.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here for this nice occasion in memory of two very, very important men.
It's a great zchut, a great joy to spend time with all of you. And of course, with my dear Rav Nissen, who really was the foundation of Chovevei in so many, many ways, who believed in Chovevei. And Rav Nissen, Lechtecha Charai Bamidbar, Rav Nissen today is not only a rabbi, he's a rabbi's rabbi, tremendous Talmid Chacham, such sensitivity to the human condition, to you and your wife and your family. Rav Nissen continued to be Nisim v'Niflaot for Am Yisrael, and to Rav Eitan and Dita. Rav Eitan, you mean so much to me. You were part of the yeshiva at a complex time, and on your shoulders, and under Rav Dov Lenz's leadership, we're now reaching higher and higher. Rav Eitan, I'm forever indebted to you, like your name. May you be strong and grow and reach higher and higher. And Rab Uri and Dalia, there are no words. There are no words. I only hope you know, all of you, how much I love you, how much I respect you and love you. I don't know if Rav Shmuel's on, maybe Rav Shmuel's on, and maybe Marat Ruth is on, but to all the Rabbanim, and of course, I'm thinking about our dear friend Rebelli. Rebelli's voice is not only the voice of a soul singer, he's not only about tefillah. Rebelli is a Rebbe, and so Steve and Sharon, when you have Eli, it's not only his melody, but his voice is so sweet and soft, and he's a teacher's teacher. Rebelli really is a great Rebbe. I saw Ben and Rachel on. I'm not sure if all three of the children were on, but my blessings to you. And of course, it's in memory of Herb Lieberman, whom I considered a very religious man. He lived right across from the Bayit. And we had a wonderful relationship going back many years. To that time, Carol and I saw both of you at the hospital just a few days before Herb left this world. And Herb was the real deal. He was what Torah is all about, Vasita Hayashav Atov B'nei Hashem, one of the greats. He just walked and tried to do what is right in the eyes of God. And of course, Reb Reuben, had the honor to see Reb Reuben once in a while in Washington. And just to see, Sharon, the way you loved and respected, as you do your mother, your father, blessed memory, your mother, Tibadeh L'chaim Arukim, it's uplifting. And of course, to my dear friends, Sharon and Steve. You know, Steve and I think some people joke that if you could build, if I were a paying customer, you could probably build a quarter of your practice or half of your practice around me. And I'm forever indebted to you, Stephen, forever, ever indebted. We dreamed together. We've experienced highs together. We've experienced, as inevitably is the case, challenges together. And most leadership is there for a bit and then moves on. Your constancy, your wisdom is so deeply, deeply appreciated. And I hope, Sharon and Steve, you know how much I respect you and love you with a real avat olam. It's an honor to share a few words. And as a matter of fact, the first Shabbat that we weren't in, but Knesset was Parshat Ki Tisa last year, and we were discussing, if you remember, of Nissen, should we go ahead with the Shabbaton, and we didn't, and that was the first Shabbat that basically all of our synagogues were closed, and we pray that we return. And so we're about ready to begin a shiur, which is called Coping with COVID, Jewish Perspectives on Dealing with Crisis. And we're on Zoom, and it's been a new experience learning how to deal with Zoom. Were we in front of each other, there would be much more give and take. But I've learned with Zoom that it's probably best to move forward. And so the shiur will go for about 45 minutes. 50 minutes, we'll be covering a lot of ground. And I ask if you think it's worthwhile to take a few notes. And after that period of time, we'll open it up. And I'd be happy to hear your reflections, your pushback, and your thoughts. My hope is to one day have this published, so I would so much appreciate your insights so that I can learn from you and learn from your insights and perhaps make what is a humble presentation a little bit of a better presentation. Just about 10 days ago, Toby and I were at Montefiore Hospital, and we met a wonderful, wonderful caregiver, Shirley, and she was about to inoculate us with the first vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine that we received. And before she did so, I said, would you mind if I offer a prayer? And as I said those words, Tove, I actually took a piece of paper and I crushed it. And I explained that the crushing of the paper symbolizes for me the custom of breaking a glass under the chuppah. It's the idea of remembering brokenness in a world at a time of great joy, and yet we were breaking that glass, crushing that piece of paper as we were experiencing the joy of being inoculated, because we were remembering the millions around the world, over 400,000 in America, thousands in Israel, who have lost their lives to COVID, who are recuperating from COVID, who've been stricken. Debbie Friedman used to sing, and please join me if you wish. Mi shebeirach avoteinu mikor habracha leimotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, renewal of body, renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. It's with the recognition of the tremendous losses suffered this year, and tefillot for their neshamot, and tefillot that those who've been stricken be healed, that we offer these humble reflections about coping with COVID. I'm so indebted to Rav Eitan, who's going to be screening the sources for us. And our point of departure is a Mizmor Tehillim, the Tehillim. It's carried me this past year. Every day, I make up my mind to say at least one parak of Tehillim. One of our students from Yeshivat Marat recently told me that she met Natan Sharansky and was so excited she ran up to him and she said, "It's an honor to meet you." And she said to him, and I was so moved by the fact that your Tehillim was with you in the Gulag, and it just gave me so much uplift. And Natan Sharansky turned and said, "Thank you," and pointed to his pocket and lifted out a little Tehillim. And he said, "It's not that I carried this Tehillim, it's that this Tehillim carried me." Wow, that's worth the price of admission. Tehillim is so beautiful. And so in the early months of COVID, we were reading Perek Chav Zayin. And so let's go to the text. The text reads, L'David Adonai ori v'yishi mimi ira. Of David, the Lord is my light and my help. Whom should I fear? Second sentence, Bikrov alai mereim lechol et bisari. Tsarai v'oivai li hemachashlu v'nafalu. When evil men assail me to devour my flesh, it is they, my foes and my enemies, who stumble and fall. And the first 6 sentences actually speak about a King David who feels protected by God. And in sentence 5, he says, Ki yitzbeneni bisuko. He, God, shelters me in his sukkah on an evil day. He grants me protection in his tent, Yastireni, b'seter ohalo. And if I can face everyone for a moment, Eitan. And then, after the first 6 sentences, there's suddenly a change. There's a cataclysmic almost movement from David feeling secure to feeling insecure, where David says in sentence 7, Shema Adonai Koli, O God, listen to my voice, Koli Ekra, I'm calling out to you in anguish. Al taster panecha mimeni, don't hide your face from me. Al titneni b'nefesh tsarai, don't deliver me to my enemies' hands. It's almost as if it's a different psalm. As a matter of fact, this division is so sharp that there are scholars who think it's two separate psalms. Could this have been written by one person? A person who feels so secure, embraced by God, and a person feeling, in a certain sense, abandoned by God, asking God for his help. And if we go back to the text, Eitan, you'll notice that in the text, in sentence 2, it's not a coincidence that in the Hebrew, tsarai, thank you so much for pointing there, tsarai nafalu, my enemies will fall before me. That's David in power. But in sentence 12, rolling all the way down, that word appears again, but in a flip way, al titneni benefesh tsarai. Do not subject me to the will of my foes. And there are other examples in the text. In sentence 5, David says, Yastireni, God, you protect me. And in sentence 9, he says, Al taster panecha mimeni. Don't stop protecting me. And so, which is it? Is it two psalms? And the great Ibn Ezra, who was a literalist, he says the following. He says, no, this refers to the same King David. Let's look at the text as we scroll further down. The Ibn Ezra says he lived in the 11th century. Nireli, ki ze hamizmor chibro David b'achrit yamav kasher nishba'u anashav, lo tavo imanu b'milchama. He argues that this psalm reflects David's memories of different epochs of his life. First, when he was young, he was strong. He defeats Goliath. He defeats the Philistines. He overcomes King Saul. Thus, David feels protected. Later on, David is weakened. He's weakened. He's weakened. He loses a son. In fact, he loses 4 sons. His son rebels against him. And Ibn Ezra cites Samuel 2, sentence 21, when later on in David's life, the same David who was so powerful, Vati od milchama la plishtim et Israel, war broke out again, and David and the men with him went down and fought the Philistines. Vaya'af David, David grows weary. And one of the central roles of a king is that he is, if you will, the general. And David's lost that power. Az nishba'u anshe David lo lemor, that second sentence. Lo teitseo ditanu la milchama. Below tichabe et ner Israel. David, no more. You can't go to battle. And then in the next sentence, Bati od hamilchama benovim plishtim. And there was another battle. And a man by the name of Elchanan rises and he kills Goliath. The last word, 2 lines from the bottom. And in the book of Chronicles, this Goliath is understood to be the brother of Goliath, also a giant of a man. David could not bring him down, and so Elchanan had to step in his stead. Isn't this extraordinary? If I could face everyone for a moment, Eitan. The same David who at a certain point of his life was strong to the point that he replaces Shaul and defeats Goliath, is now weak, and he's now replaced, and he needs help in overcoming the same Goliath's brother. This approach of Ibn Ezra speaks to the reality of life. It compartmentalizes life. After all, there are moments of highs, and then there are moments of lows. To wit, David was strong when he was younger, and he's much weaker when he was older. Stephen mentioned when I was stricken with a heart attack, it was so hard for me. As a young activist, I felt invincible, and then suddenly I couldn't breathe. Before that moment, I felt God's protection, but I remember lying in that ambulance wondering, where are you, God? Why have you abandoned me? But for tonight, as we deal with coping with COVID, our approach will be a bit more complex because most of life can't be compartmentalized. That is, built into highs, there are lows. And built into lows, there are highs. While the Ibn Ezra seems to place David's life into absolute compartments, times he was strong and other times that he was weak, maybe it's a bit more complex. Maybe even in strength, there's weakness. And sometimes in weakness, there is strength. The great poet Yehuda Amichai says it very well if we can go back to the screen. One of my favorite. And I'm going to ask Eitan to please send this out. This is what the great poet of Israel says. Adam b'chayav ve'en lo zman sheyeh lo zman lakol. Person doesn't have time in his or her life to have time for everything. Ve'en lo eit shetiyeh lo eit l'cho chefetz kohelet lo tzadak tishamakach. The human being doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every person. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. Ecclesiastic wrote, Eit lakol, there's a time for everything. Look what he says. This is gorgeous. Adam tzarich lisno v'lehov b'vat achat. If we could point, Eitan, please. A man needs to love and hate at the same moment. To laugh and cry with the same eyes. I'm on the English side. With the same hands to throw stones and gather them. I love this third paragraph. Amichai writes, to make love in war and war in love. Lasot ahava b'milchama u'milchama b'ava. And to hate and forgive and remember and forget. To arrange and confuse, to eat and digest what history takes years and years to do. Adam b'chayav ein lo zman, kishehu mabed hu mechapes, kishehu motzei hu shocheach, ukishehu shocheach hu ohev, ukishehu ohev. When one loses, one seeks. When one finds, one forgets. When one forgets, one loves. When one loves, one begins to forget. And that's the way, if I could face everyone again, that's the way we're going to try to approach our topic of coping with COVID. To understand it not as a absolutist negative, but to offer suggestions how it's much, much more complex. And we'll do so by considering Dr. Viktor Frankl's of blessed memory psychology of logotherapy as discussed in his Man's Search for Meaning, which I encourage all of you to read. Frankl parts from Freudian or Adlerian psychology, suggesting that the will to meaning is central to the human condition. Let's read what he says. Let me explain, Dr. Frankel says, why I have employed the term logotherapy as the name for my theory. Logos is a Greek word that denotes meaning. Logotherapy focuses on the meaning of human existence as well as on man's search for such a meaning. Of course, they're using man in the generic sense. According to logotherapy, the striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. That is why I speak of a will to meaning in contrast to the pleasure principle, or as we could also term it, the will to pleasure, on which Freudian psychoanalysis is centered, as well as in contrast to the will to power stressed by Adlerian psychology. If I could face everyone for a moment. Viktor Frankl in Vienna was part of that circle. Freud says that what really motivates us to do what we do is our sexual urges. Adler says it's the quest for power. Frankl stresses it's the potential for meaning. The potential for meaning. I'm thinking of your rabbis, Rav Nissen. I'm thinking of Rav Eitan. What is it that motivates Rav Uri and others, Rav Shmuel, Rav Stephen, to do what they do? What is it that motivates so many listening to my voice, Stephen and Sharon, to give in no small measure? There's something within us, I would say it's the image of God, that inspires us to seek meaning. And there's no greater meaning than giving. And if enough people find meaning through giving collectively, redemption can come. But here, Frankl says something so counterintuitive, something so critical. Viktor Frankl stresses that the potential for meaning is not only found in euphoric moments, but in moments of suffering. Because if it's only found in euphoric moments, it's not a formula for life. Because built into life are moments of ecstasy. But by definition, built into life are moments of defeat. Built into health is that the day will come that sickness will arrive. The price of life is dying. So if meaning only comes from the high, that's not a formula. And therefore he writes, let's go to the text. He says as follows, and this is from an analysis of my dear friend, may he have a refuah shlema, Rabbi Reuven Boka, classmates of Rabbi Jacob Joseph, and he has served as a rabbi in Ottawa for many years. He writes, Frankl, however, is less bothered by the meaning to be found in love or work, in health and pleasant conditions. Man's greatest problems are encountered in suffering and tragedy, and unconditional meaning can have validity only if this meaning can be inserted into the suffering situation. By giving meaning to suffering, Frankl is in effect saying that all life has meaning, because if it doesn't have meaning in suffering, then it doesn't work for a good chunk of life. And what he argues is the following. He says, even then, even in moments of suffering, human beings have freedom of choice to react with an attitude of optimism. Look at the bullets. Even in those moments of suffering, humans have the freedom to react with an attitude of optimism. Even in the camps, even in the concentration and death camps, And Frankel's logotherapy was reinforced by his Shoah experiences. He, I believe, survived 4 of the camps. Those camps brought out the worst in some, but it brought out the best in others. Even at that moment, there's a gap when we make a decision. We make a decision. What will our attitude be? Will we reach for the stars, or will we sink lower than the fish? And so Rabbi Boker writes, logotherapy puts great emphasis on man's freedom. Man is able to meet any situation in the fullness of his human potential and to react in the freedom of expression, which is known as a human response. Man remains forever free to decide what his stand will be in spite of the most dismal circumstances. Attitude is the key. The optimistic attitude Frankl takes to life dictates a meaning to suffering. And I love the next line. Logotherapy tells man and woman not just to endure suffering, but to find a meaning in it. Now, make no mistake. I'd like to say sometimes it's not worth the suffering. But given the reality that suffering is built into life, when that occurs, not to just endure, but to find meaning in it, we may not be able to fully know the real meaning of one's suffering. But what Rabbi Boker is saying is we can invest suffering with meaning. And one of the most beautiful commentaries on Psalm 23, The Lord is my shepherd, was written by Matt Fenster of blessed memory. Matt struggled with cancer. He died a very young man. And he asked that his commentary to this psalm be read at his funeral. And I've asked Stephen and Sharon if they could be kind enough to read and sit back. What a marvelous commentary. And remember, it's written by a man struggling with cancer. Please. Stephen, Sharon, I'll read the Hebrew. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar.
God is my shepherd, I shall not lack.
I never have lacked.
Binot deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinahaleni.
In lush meadows he lays me down, beside tranquil waters he leads me.
This year, I have been able to feel a peace that I had not previously known. In Hebrew, nachat ruach.
Nafshi yishovev.
He restores my soul.
Which I believe is eternal.
Yancheni b'magle tzedek leman shmo.
He leads me on paths of justice for his name's sake.
Am ki elech b'geit samavet lo irara ki ata imadi.
Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Throughout this ordeal, I have never been afraid. Perhaps it's because I am a person of faith, or maybe I am too simple-minded to recognize the magnitude of the loss that I am facing.
Shiftecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni.
Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
I interpret God's rod and staff to be my family, my friends, respectively.
Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tsoroi.
You prepare a table before me in view of my tormentors.
I
I think about the table. I'm sorry, go on.
I think about the tables in my life, my childhood dinner table, breakfast before school with my kids at a cafe table, the Seder table, the table from which I read the Torah in synagogue.
Ishanta vashemen roshi.
Anointed my head with oil.
I was brought up to believe I was special and could accomplish anything that I wanted.
Kosi rivaya.
A cup overflows.
A phrase I have uttered to myself each Friday night before the words of Kiddush.
Achtov vachesed yudefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti bevet Adonai la'orech yamim.
May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God for eternity.
Although I am saddened by what I will miss, the days with which I have been blessed have been full.
If I could face everyone for a moment. My Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, thank you so much, Sharon and Steve. And I just find Matt's words, every time I read it, so very moving. Rabbi Soloveitchik expresses what is a similar idea to Frankel. I don't know if they had a relationship, but he takes it to new levels, not speaking so much from a psychological, but from a philosophical perspective. And in 1956, Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote in Hebrew a book called Kol Dodi Dofek, 11 years after the Shoah. He insisted, unlike many other rabbis at that time, that for those who ask why 6 million died, the Rav says, we don't know. Now, when he says we just don't know, he's not talking about the need to analyze the politics of the era, the Chamberlain question. He's not talking about David Wyman's work of the American abandonment of the Jews, of how America did not even fill its immigration quotas. That's not what he's talking about. Rather, he's talking about why is it that so many wonderful people, including well over 1 million children, suffered this terrible, terrible fate. And he says, let's go to the text. This is what he writes. He says, in short, the eye of fate, we each have a certain fate within us, it's part of the eye, asks a speculative metaphysical question with regard to evil. And this question is not susceptible to solution and has no answer, if I can face everyone. In a similar sense, not to be comparing anything to the Shoah, we ask, as we complete this year, and hopefully we're seeing the light, we ask why. Now, I'm not talking about the why. Of course, it's necessary for us to investigate Wuhan, for WHO to do better. Of course, it's necessary for people to wear masks. If they don't wear masks, we're vulnerable. But I'm talking about the why. That this past year, people whom we love, especially older people, have suffered so. You know, in society, when I reached 70, they said, Avi, don't worry. The 70 today is like 50 of old. And I remember when I was called and asked by a reporter, Gary Rosenblatt said, I'm doing a piece. It seems that the new 70 is really 90 because we've been cooped up in this house. I saw Tova Bulau on the phone. I saw other dear, dear friends. This has been difficult. And there have been good people, wonderful people who've suffered this past year. And so concerning their fate, we ask why. And the Rav says, we don't know. But then he says something remarkable. Let's go to the text. He says, given that fate over which we have no control, there is the human potential to forge a new destiny. These are his words. In the second dimension of man's or woman's existence, destiny, in Hebrew yi'ud, the question of suffering takes on new form. What is the existence of destiny? This is an active existence in which man and woman confront the environment into which they were cast. Let's roll down. If we were facing each other, we would spend a lot of time give and take. This is what he writes. The slogan of the Eye of Destiny is, against your will you are born, and against your will you die, but with your free will do you live. Man is born as an object, dies as an object, but it is within his capacity to live as a subject, as a creator who impresses on his life his individual imprimatur and who lives autonomously. He wrote it in Hebrew, his words, Al korchach adam nolad. We have no choice in the matter. We're born against our will. Val korchach adam met. And against our will we die. That's our fate. But aval beratzon chafshi adam chai. But with our freedom of choice, we can live. And I love the next line. According to Judaism, our mission in this world is to turn fate into destiny. To udato shel adam, lafoch goral liyud. An existence that is passive and influenced to an existence that is active and influential, an existence of compulsion, perplexity, and speechlessness, to an existence full of will and initiative, to dato shel hadam, lafoch goral liyud, kiyum muf'al umushpa, kiyum poel umashpiyah. If I can face everyone. In a word, what is Rabbi Soloveitchik saying? He is saying that limitations and fate limits us. On some level, we don't know why things happen, why the good suffer. We don't know why. But limitations should not quash possibilities. Limitations should not quash possibilities. Perhaps, is it possible that we can emerge from the COVID darkness with new points of light? Again, that's no reason to want COVID. How I wish it didn't happen. But it happened. And a lot of good people who deserve better have been suffering. And some didn't make it. But can we, within that suffering, there's still potential for meaning? Or the Rav's philosophy, within that darkness, can we find points of light? Can we emerge from COVID with greater humility? Has COVID finally taught us that as much as humankind knows, there's so much we don't know? Can we emerge from COVID with a greater sense of commonality? This pandemic knows no color, no faith, no borders. Can we emerge from COVID with a greater sense of the human potential to give? I was fortunate enough to become part of the Astra Zenica vaccine trial. And as I went for the first inoculation I was given to, I was unmasked. And in the end, I found out many weeks later that I had received a placebo. But at that time, I didn't know. And I asked those around me, and I was number 5 at Montefiore in this third round. And so in the room, there were so many doctors, there were so many helpers. My goodness, the way they brought in the vaccine, you would think, my goodness, they bring it in. And just before dear Nitsa injected me, I said, can I offer a prayer? And I said, Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei chol basar umafli lasot. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who heals all flesh. And then I interpreted umafli lasot, which is normatively related back to God. God does wonders in healing, and suggested that maybe after saying, thank you, God, for healing, we then say umafli, and you do wondrous things, God, lasot, in that you've given human beings the capacity to heal. And I looked at all those around me and I said, you thank me for being part of this trial. thank you, thank you, thank you. God gave you the wondrous ability to heal others, to turn fate into destiny. And it's that sentence from Psalms. Here's the Psalms again. Min hameitza karatika anani bamerchavka. In distress I called upon the Lord. The Lord answered me and brought me relief. I'd like to interpret that to mean that from distress, we can emerge more expansively. Min hameitza, from the distress, anani bamerchavka. I'm not just making it, I'm making it with a sense of greater expansiveness. Indeed, Rav Nissen, Rav Eitan, your community and other communities have rallied and come closer. And when it's over, we pray we will be stronger than ever. My Rebbe, Leonard Cohen, said it well. 4 of my favorite lines. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, if I can face everyone. Ring the bells that still can ring out. You know, he left in his will, Leonard Cohen, that he wanted, when buried, only to be known as Reb Label HaKohen. And only 7 people was at its burial. And actually the rabbi was Rabbi Adam Shire, who your rabbis know very, very well. And so when he was writing about bells, he was writing about redemption. He was writing for the world. It's like our shofar. So what kind of bell should we ring that brings about redemption? So you would think it's got to be the perfect bell. Yeah, but perfection is the enemy of goodness. And so he writes, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. To turn fate into destiny. Lafoch goral liyud. I have one more step. This capacity to find meaning, the potential to find meaning in suffering, the capacity to turn fate into destiny, is the result certainly of human input. But I would say, as a theologian, for me, I know there would be those who would argue, it's only with God's help. It's in covenantal partnership with God. It is a belief that in the toughest of times, God is with us. Let's take a look at the text. The text in Deuteronomy reads that there will be moments of hastarat panim, moments of the eclipse of God, and the text says there will be moments for anochi haster astir panai bayom hahu. Yet I will keep my countenance hidden on that day, literally. And God says, I will hide my countenance, my presence from you. There'll be moments when not only will I be in an eclipse, I will be in the eclipse of the eclipse. There will be moments not only of darkness, but the deeper darkness. There will be moments of night, but of midnight. But the Rebbe Rav Nachman of Pratzlav says, Afilu v'hastaram, shebetoch hastaram, bevadai gam sham, nimtza Hashem yitbarach. Even in the hiddenness of the hiddenness, even there, the Blessed One can be found. Even when you experience the most difficult times, even there, I am with you. In the end, after that heart attack, I had to be wheeled in to the operating room, and on the gurney, my dear wife and children had to leave me, and I walked in and I was in tears. I was in tears, but somehow I was able to dig deep And in the hiddenness of the hiddenness, I knew and tried to feel that potential, tried to feel the presence of God who would help the doctors see me through this. And in one of the most painful moments of Jewish history, that moment of the destruction of the temple, I want you to consider a psalm we all know well and look at the way the rabbis understand this psalm, taking it out of its literal meaning. The psalm reads, Al Narot Bavel, Al Naharot Bavel, Sham Yashavnu, Gam Bachinu, Bizachrenu et Zion, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. There on the willows, we hung up our musical instruments. For our captors, amusing themselves, asked for songs. Our tormentors for amusement said, Shiru lanu shir Tzion. And the literal meaning of this is, at that point, we cut off our hands so we could tell them, how can we sing the song of the Lord on alien soil? Ech nashir et shir Adonai al admat nechar. We don't have hands with which to play the instrument. And then they recited as we recite, Imeshkachech Yerushalayim Tish Kach Yemini. If I forget, O Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten. Now look at the way the Medrash understands Imeshkachech Yerushalayim. The literal meaning is that we say these words on this sentence. The Psikta says, second paragraph on If I Forget You, O Jerusalem, Rabbi Azariah and Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Reish Lakish, you find that when Israel's sins brought it about, that enemies invaded Jerusalem, the enemies seized Israel's warriors and bound their hands behind their backs. At Motzei Kevan Shegarmu Havonot V'Nichnesu Sonim Lirushalayim Natlu Giborei Israel V'Kaftu Yedehem Lachorehem. Thereupon the Holy One declared, Scripture says of me, I will be with him in trouble. Imo Anochi B'Tzara, Banai Shuyim B'Tzara V'Ani B'Revacha. And so, since my children are deep in trouble, let's scroll down. Can I remain at ease? Because Israel's hands had been bound by their enemies, God bound his right hand behind his back. Now, I want to show you where this comes from. This is now unbelievable. The sentence in Lamentations in Echo reads, Godah b'chari af. In blazing anger, God cut us down. Kol Keren Yisrael, all the might of Israel. This is a description about the way God abandoned us. Heshiv achor yemino. I'm lifting my voice because I'm so emotional about this. The literal text says God has withdrawn his right hand. In the presence of the foe, he withdrew his right hand of protection. He has ravaged Jacob like flaming fire, consuming on all sides. That's what the text means. Heshiv ochor yimino. God has withdrawn his right hand. But let's now look at the Medrash. What do the rabbis do with this text? Lift it up if you want in a moment. We're going back to the previous Midrash Shaitan. Look what the Medrash does. It takes this sentence, Heshiv achor yemino, which in the literal flow means God withdrew his hands, allowing the Jews to remain unprotected, and it understands Heshiv achor yemino, that when God saw that the Jewish people were without hands, in empathy with them, God, kivayochel, if you will, cut off his own hands. The Midrash takes it out of its flow, turns it on its heels. Thereupon the Holy One declared, Scripture says of me, I will be with him in trouble. And so, since my children are deep in trouble, can I remain, let's scroll down, can I remain at ease? Kivayochel heshiv ochor yamino. If I could face everyone, this is the key. The literal meaning of the sentence is God withdrew from helping us. God abandoned us. The Medrash is claiming, no, it's precisely then that God was protecting us. Do you remember chapter 4 in Elie Wiesel's book, when that little boy was hanging from the gallows and he was so light, he was dangling between life and death. He wasn't heavy enough to die immediately. And somebody behind Wiesel asks Elie, of blessed memory, where's God? Where's God? And the response came, there is God. He's hanging from the gallows. Now, the literal interpretation is, there is God. God's abandoned us. Look at what's happening to this child. But the Medrash is arguing, if this child is hanging like that, there's God. God's dying too. God's hanging too. And so when Stephen and Sharon were sitting Shiva for their respective fathers, and we gathered around, we said, Hamakom Yinachem Etchem, which literally means God is sitting Shiva with you. God is with you. And that final midrash, a more generic midrash, where in Tehillim, again, the book of Psalms, it says, Yikra'eni ve'enehu, when he calls on me, I will answer him. It's uppercase me. When we call upon God, God will answer. I will answer him. What will God say? Imo anochi b'tzara. I will be with him. God is saying to us, I will be with Israel. I will be with those in distress. Imo anochi b'tzara. Achaltsehu v'yachabdehu. I will rescue him and make him honored. And so I close with a Torah for my son. My son says that in the psalmist text, just scroll up just a bit, the flow of the text has God answering after we've been redeemed. But in the Midrash quoted by Rashi, from the midst of the thorn bush and not from any other tree, this is now on the text in the Torah that says God revealed himself from a thorn bush in the sneh, the burning bush, not from a beautiful tree. V'lo ilan acher, mishum imo onochi b'tzara. Imo anochi b'tzara doesn't mean acclamation that God is with us after we see that we have been redeemed, that we've been healed. The rabbis understand it to mean that God is saying, I am with you, even in the darkness, before the redemption. I'm going to be with you if I could face everyone. And so my Dove, who wrote this beautiful book, Pious Irreverence, which is the theology of protest, brilliant work, if I can say objectively, he says, well, maybe this midrash, perhaps it's a reaction. The rabbis are reacting to those who, after the destruction of the Second Temple, certainly Christianity was saying God abandoned the Jewish people. It's time to leave the Jewish faith. And what do they say? No, the rabbis are saying it's precisely then at that moment of abandonment. It's precisely then that the rabbis insist, no, it was then especially, Imo anochi b'tzara, God was with us. If you don't have a right hand, God says, I don't have a right hand. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? That Medrash brings tears of joy to my eyes. I've been around for a while in the rabbinate. I always thought Imeshkachech Yerushalayim is what we say, and indeed we say it. But the rabbis are saying, you know who also says it with you? God. And so as a theologian, what I would add, yes, Viktor Frankl, the psychologist, says there's potential meaning even in suffering. May we be spared the suffering, but it's part of life. And may, in that moment of freedom of choice, may we find an attitude to be optimistic, maybe with others, if we're incapable, encouraging us to be optimistic, to find meaning even in suffering, not to just endure the suffering, but to find meaning in the suffering. And yes, as Rabbi Soloveitchik said, a lot of questions, we don't know why. Why me? Why us? We don't know. But we have it within our power to turn fate into destiny. But all of that psychology and all of that philosophy, I would argue this is something I feel deeply, and it's certainly part of Jewish theology. It's not the only theology, but that ability to find meaning in suffering, but to turn destiny, to turn fate into destiny. It's only with the help of God. It's the recognition that even in the toughest times, God is with us. And so this nigun, using the Rav's words, join me. I used to write nigunim years ago, and with Rabbi's help, we were on our way to Pittsburgh with others, and ultimately wrote this nigun. Teudato shel Adam להפוך גורליות, קיום מופעל ומושפע, לקיום פועל ומשפיע, קיום מופעל ומושפע, לקיום פועל ומשפיע. על כורחך אדם נולד, ועל כורחך אדם מת, אבל ברצון חופשי אדם חי, אבל ברצון חופשי אדם חי. Our mission in life is to turn fate into destiny, an existence that's passive and influence to an active, influential life. Against our will we are born, and against our will we die. But with freedom of choice we live, rather than ask why not ask what now? Never allowing what we cannot do to control what we can do. Teudato shel Adam להפוך גורליות, קיום מופעל ומושפע, לקיום קיום פועל ומשפיע. Now facing you, so join me in the niggin. To turn fate Bezrat Hashem into destiny. So I don't know if we have a few moments. We had a break in there, so we've been going about 50 minutes. And if anybody has any reflections, any thoughts, I apologize again that I have done so much talking, but that's the new world of Zoom. But I'd love to hear what you feel and your thoughts on this. It would be my honor.
Ravi, I'll have a question since nobody is jumping in yet. You know, whenever things happen that are difficult, whether it's COVID or what went on this summer after George Floyd or anything, just what just happened a few weeks ago, I think that some people, they're always looking to find the positive spin. And some people, they only want to sit, or maybe it's not people, maybe it's at different times, only want to sit in the pain and they don't want to find the positive message. They're not looking for that. It feels to me like you struck a beautiful balance in this lecture of recognizing the pain, but also trying to be uplifting. But I'm wondering if you can say more about that process of responding to a challenge and not on the one hand ignoring the pain, but also you don't want to be totally sitting in the pain. You want us to be able to be uplifted. I mean, I think a question I think about as a rabbi all the time, and I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit about that. I think that
with Nissen, you said it very beautifully, that this is one of our greatest challenges. I think that in a very deep way, Viktor Frankl, how I wish I would have met him to give him a hug. In a very deep way, that's what he was saying. He doesn't deny the suffering, of course not. And I believe he is saying, as the Rav is saying, we should be impacted by the suffering, but we should not allow our lives to be defined by the suffering. That's the key. When Frankl talks about that, even in those difficult moments, we have the freedom of choice. Well, what do we do with this? And this is what community is about. Community is about that if I'm stuck in my suffering, if I'm stuck in that fate, community is about, like Brother Roger would sing at our shul from the gospel choir, lean on me when you're not strong and I'll be your friend. And then the song goes, so just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem. We lean on each other. That's what you do so brilliantly, Rav Nissen. I see you sitting next to your Rabbanit. That's what you do so beautifully for all these years. And frankly, you know, there's a custom that when rabbis walk in, people stand up. I have a custom in my shul. When congregants walk in, I stand up. Because there have been so many moments when I've been in the doldrums and they've lifted me. It's not easy to be optimistic. What's the formula of making the decision to have an optimistic attitude? Well, as a theologian, I think I'm more of a behaviorist. I think it's if you act optimistically, it'll impact on the emotions. It's basically a Jewish concept of Nasev Nishma, Lefi Apolot Nimshachim Halavavo. I found this with Shoah survivors. Our shul was dedicated to the 6 million and to Chaylei Tzahal who fell. But I've met survivors whose lives are defined by the Shoah. That's not good. It's not a good thing, if I may say. I don't think that's the way it should be impacted. Never will I judge someone for having their lives defined. I was never there, thank God. We should be impacted, but not defined by it. And that's what I think it's all about. It's the recognition of where we should be when we're in this suffering mode. We have the choice. We can turn fate in. I believe we can turn fate into destiny in any circumstance of life, even dying, even the pain of dying. Even there, I have seen dying that's lonely, and I have seen dying that's loving. Even there, I think Frankel is saying something real. And of course, so is the Rav, with the help of God. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Nissen.
Rabbi, it's Lawrence Silverman, Rube's son.
Oh, pleasure.
And for me as well. A few people on the call know this. Rube's father was born in 1898. Mother was born in 1898 and went to Lakewood to be a nurse at a field hospital for the 1918 pandemic. And she took care of his father's first wife who died. So the fate of the Spanish flu became the destiny of us being on this call, because Rube wouldn't have been here. Sharon, Barbara, and I, Phyllis, Natalie wouldn't have been here. Lester wouldn't have been here.
Yes.
So it is an interesting circle.
Right. And that touched me so deeply. And again, it's not to say that one is worth the other, but one has to be blind not to see some kind of relationship between them. I love the Leonard Cohen line. Through the cracks, the light gets in. And I really want everyone to know I'm truly talking to myself, and I'm letting you listen. COVID has brought me great sadness. I love being with people. I love hugging people. It brought me great sadness. And I'm telling all of you that in the beginning of COVID, I went through a mini depression. It was a very difficult time for me. And I was helped. I was helped by Ellie, who happens to be on the side of psychiatrist. I was helped. It's not that, if one can't pass that Frankel test or Rav test, that we're nothings. We're not. Life is life. Life is complicated. But understanding that is the goal, and recognizing that we're in this to help each other in a gentle way, knowing when to step back, when to move forward. That's what it's all about. And thank God I did come out of it. And Bezrat Hashem. Take one or two more comments and we'll call it a night.
Rabbi?
Yes, please.
So what I'm hearing from you, and even the toughest times.
If you can identify yourself, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Helene Riesler.
Yeah.
So
Please.
what I'm hearing from you, and I cling to this myself, even in the toughest times, God is with us and will help us, and people help each other.
Yes.
And we ask God to help us. Always ask God to help us.
Right. I stand in judgment of no one.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Who says, Eliezer Berkovitz writes, in Faith After the Holocaust, he had such an impact on my life. He had something to do with the creation of Chovevei too. But he writes in his introduction, he says, anyone who was a victim of the anti-Semitism of the Third Reich, of Hitler, Yamach Shemo v'Zichro, is a hero. Anyone who's been that victim. And then he writes, is a holy person, he writes, is a holy, holy person. And then he writes, he says, and those who died from Hitler with the name of God on their lips, they died as survivors, as holy survivors who believed in God. And those who died damning God died no less holy. No less holy. They were holy disbelievers. Some died holy believers, some died holy. But my theology that I try to teach myself, and it's not that I haven't had moments of doubt. We have 3 children, they're married, so we now have 6 children, grandchildren, thank God. But we had a 4th child who died at a very young age. It changed my life entirely. It was a very tough time. And I want my congregants to know they're not speaking to a rabbi it's a rabbi who's a human being who struggles. And thank God I came out of that with a stronger sense of belief. But my theology is, yes, whatever we do, is Bezrat Hashem. with the help of God. It's a beautiful story I have in the book Holistic Prayer that Sharon and Stephen are kind enough to distribute. And it's a story I heard from my dear, dear father. And he tells the story about a town was under siege, and the citizenry was very frightened, and they decided to convene a prayer service. And to add meaning to the gathering, they hired a kind of actor, Tom Hanks. He would dramatically read the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd." And to avoid embarrassing the elderly rabbi of the town, they asked the rabbi to read the same psalm after the actor was through. And so at the service, the actor reads the psalm with perfect pitch and perfect inflection. The crowd was mesmerized, and as he finished, the townsfolk rose as one to their feet, giving the actor a standing ovation. Then the rabbi hobbled to the podium, showing his age and the pain of the moment. He weakly began reading the psalm. As he read, he was overcome with emotion. His voice broke and tears flowed down his face. The assembled were overwhelmed. Whimpers, even sobs could be heard. As the rabbi finished his reading, no one moved. No one dared speak. Later that night, I'm now reading my father's words. The actor was asked for an explanation. "You read beautifully, but the rabbi's rendering was deeper. Given your training and expertise, how were you outdone?" The actor responded, "When I was asked to recite the 23rd Psalm, I memorized the entire chapter. I mastered each sentence and came to know it perfectly. I delivered every word of the Lord is my shepherd." But the rabbi not only knows the psalm, he also knows the shepherd. That's my Abba. He also knows the shepherd.
Rabbi, this is Stephen.
Yes, Stephen.
I just wanted to thank you for such an amazing, deep, and meaningful and personal learning. You shared so much of yourself with us. And I think you've given us, and I imagine many of the people on the call, added strength to deal with all the things they're dealing with. So thank you.
My great honor, Stephen, and I close as I started, thanking you, Stephen and Sharon, and and I just want to close with a suggestion that has helped me very much. Every morning when I rise and I say the Modeh Ani, I add another prayer that has two parts that I wanted to share with you, and you may want to consider saying it in your own way. It's helped me. I say something like the following. I say, "Dear God, as I rise, I want to thank you for all of my blessings that you've given me. Help me not focusing on the blessings that I do not have. Help me focus on the blessings that I do have." And then I say, "And dear God, allow me to experience this day as a full qualitative day. Allow me for a moment not to think about tomorrow and what comes after. Let me live this day as a full and complete day." And I offer the blessing to my dear, dear Rav Nissen, to Rav Eitan. Thank you so much for your help tonight. And Rav Uri, my blessing, Alu, keep reaching higher and higher. As the Sfat Emet says, Sarich Adam liot malech, keep walking and leading, mimadrega lemadrega. Hope you know how much I respect you and love you, and to your beautiful community. I bless you with Shavua Tov, and may we bring the spirit of Shabbat into the week. Shavua Tov and good Shabbos too. May this week be a week of good Shabbos.
So Rav, I'll pick up on your words there. So good to be all together, even if on Zoom. Thank you, Steve and Sharon. Thank you, Rebbe. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, ya na 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 na. Hine ma tov, di da da di da 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 da. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. 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 You know, if I keep singing, then Rabbi Eitan has to keep spotlighting people. We can keep this going for a long time. This is amazing. Thank you much, Steve and Sharon. Thank you, everyone. Shavua Tov. Eliyahu Navi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Agilanti, Eliyahu Agilati, Eliyahu Navi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Agilanti, Eliyahu Agilati. Shkoyach, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, everybody. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Shavua Tov, everybody. Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.